This week we'll be discussing hearing loss. A quick word about preferred language. People born with hearing loss do not view themselves as being impaired or having a disability, and they do not prefer the term hearing impaired. In general, they prefer the term deaf, or if the hearing loss is not complete, hard of hearing. They consider themselves to be born into a deaf culture, and the deaf community is generally tight-knit, with American Sign Language being its language. American Sign Language is not just a manual translation of English. It is its own language with its own grammar and set of rules and dialects that vary from region to region. The deaf community considers itself to be its own rich culture, so it's important when you're working with someone who is deaf or hard of hearing to keep this in mind. There are 3 types of hearing loss. The first type of hearing loss is a conductive hearing loss. And conductive loss is a result of loss of function in the outer or middle ear. An example could be a perforated eardrum or ossification of the bones in the middle ear. This type of loss will respond better to hearing aids than other types of loss. The second type of hearing loss is sensory neural loss. Sensory neural loss results from loss of function in the inner ear, the auditory nerve, or in the hearing cortex. This loss does not respond as well to a hearing aid. It's the type of loss that is treated when cochlear implants are used, and cochlear implants are a topic of much debate in the deaf community. So you want to be sensitive to that as well. And finally, there's mixed loss, and mixed is a combination of conductive and sensory neural loss. Hearing loss can be bilateral or unilateral, and even in bilateral hearing loss, one ear is often stronger than the other. So when you're talking with someone with hearing loss, you want to make sure that their good ear is closer to you. Communication characteristics. Communication characteristics will vary depending on the degree of hearing loss and when in development hearing loss occurred. So if you're dealing with an older person with a hearing loss, then their communication has already been established, as opposed to a child who was either born deaf or lost their hearing at a very young age due to something like meningitis. There may be use of a signing system in place. Those who are profoundly deaf or who have severe hearing loss will probably use some sort of sign language. They may use American Sign Language, or they may use Signed English. Signed English is a more direct translation of English, and then there's Signed Exact English also. They may be bilingual and able to use both American Sign Language and Signed English. Sign language does not just use the hands. The entire space around the upper body is used, and facial expressions are extremely important in conveying meaning. In this video, pay attention to how the girl uses her whole face and the space in front of her upper body, and then listen to her explanation of why maintaining eye contact is important. Maintaining eye contact will be very important in communicating with those who are deaf or hard of hearing. Even if you don't sign at all, you'll pick up valuable information about how your communication partner is feeling just by watching his or her face. Those who sign tend to be much more animated than speaking individuals. She's telling you your name. She's asking your name. Look at her eyebrows. And it's nice to meet you, she said.
Okay guys, for today I'm going to be teaching you some basic introductions and greetings in American Sign Language. Now there's many new signs today, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the videos in kind of a playlist order, and that way you can click through the videos individually and pick apart what you really need to work on. So there'll be like 3 or 4 videos today, and just kind of take your time, go at your own pace, and click through each one individually in order. Okay, now before we get started, I'd like to talk about one of the main cardinal rules in signing, and that's maintaining eye contact with those you're signing with. Now this is really important, not only in just showing that you're engaged in the conversation, but also so that you both, or whoever you're signing with, can look at each other's facial expressions so that you can really understand what they're trying to convey in their signs. Now, facial expressions, as I stated in signing etiquette, are very important for emotion and emphasis, but it's also really important when you're asking questions. And there are going to be some questions in today's lesson, so you're going to need to understand that maintaining eye contact and watching their face will really help you understand if they're.
That's what I wanted you to understand. Deaf speech. It is possible for deaf or hard of hearing individuals to learn to speak. Generally, they are taught proprioceptive and kinesthetic cues for speech sounds since they can't monitor how they hear. So they'll be taught where in their mouth certain parts of their mouth are moving and touching, and that's how they will monitor their speech. Deaf speech, for example, an individual will be taught that P and B are produced by stopping the airflow with both lips. It has several distinct characteristics. Deaf speech is slower. It's hard work to talk without being able to hear. More careful attention must be paid to the muscles of speech, where they are placed, and how they are moved. It tends to be more monotone. Because deaf or hard of hearing individuals cannot hear themselves or others, their speech is often monotone. They do not vary pitch or volume when they are talking as much as hearing individuals would. Distortion of speech sounds. And by this I mean speech sounds may sound fuzzy or unclear. So they may have the correct placement of the sound, but an S might be a little slushy or a little slurry because they can't hear to monitor how precise that sound is. And then the quality of speech may be different. Speech may have a breathier or throatier quality to it. This is Heather Whitestone. She's the former Miss America. Listen to what you notice about her speech. Some of her speech sounds are distorted, O, S, and R, to name a few. Her rate is pretty good. It might be a little bit slower, but her intonation is pretty good too, although she seems to overemphasize syllables. She's probably rehearsed this speech many times. She was a dancer, that her talent was dancing in the Miss America competition. And also, pageant contestants do tend to train in speaking and in public speaking, so that probably helps her with her speech as well.
I got involved with Bill Austin and his wife Tanny with the Starkey Foundation for 15 years. And they are the same people, they love what they're doing, and they are they have big heart for the people who need a hearing aid and they cannot afford them. And so I see the true heart in their body and know that they're not fake, and they reach out to people and want to help you so much. So I just love to be around them, and that's why I'm here helping them for 15 years.
Her grammar was a little bit off too, but that's a really good example of deaf speech. Speech in the hard of hearing. This little diagram over here to the right is called the speech banana. And essentially what it shows is the loudness at which certain sounds are produced and the frequency. So you can see that F, S, and TH, they're high frequency sounds, and they're also relatively soft sounds. Your vowels are louder, um, so the vowels are much easier to hear. And so in hard of hearing individuals, those higher frequency, quieter sounds may be missing or distorted. Sounds such as F, S, T, H, T, K may be left out of speech or produced incorrectly. You'll notice that P is also a softer sound, but it's very visible because it's produced on the lips. So distortion or omission of these sounds will result in speech that is difficult to understand. Also, individuals who are hard of hearing will have difficulty with volume, pitch, and inflection. Their speech may sound too loud or too soft. They may pitch their voice too high, or they may sound unclear due to inappropriate use of stress on syllables. So they might stress the wrong syllable in the word, or they might stress the wrong sentence or word in the sentence compared to what we're typically used to hearing. And then sometimes word endings are left off. This will impact grammar as verb tenses, plurals, possessives, comparatives, superlatives, etc. are marked with word endings. And a lot of those verb tenses, past tenses, and plurals and possessives, they're marked with those higher frequency, softer sounds. So they're more difficult to hear. Language development in individuals who are deaf or hard of hearing is generally slower than in hearing children. In general, for vocabulary development is slower. Concrete words are learned more quickly than abstract words. So something like ball will be learned more easily than something like love or more or less. So those emotive words are going to be harder, and those concept words and things like colors might be a little more difficult. Um, Whereas something as concrete as cat would be much easier. Um, Functional words such as a, an, and the are difficult. Also is and helping verbs. And there will be difficulty with multiple meaning words. The vocabulary gap between deaf and hard of hearing individuals and hearing individuals widens with age. So as the children are younger, you will not see the size gap as when later on in high school. And often, actually, in terms of reading levels, you'll see that deaf individuals often don't get above a fourth grade reading level. And part of this is due to the fact that American Sign Language is not English. In terms of grammar, you're going to notice shorter sentences in individuals with a hearing loss. You'll have less varied sentence structure. There will be omission, and they will have difficulty understanding those functional words such as articles and helping verbs. So they're slower to develop in their vocabulary, so then they're also missing from their grammar those function words. And then word endings are not heard, and they're also omitted. This will impact, once again, plurals, possessives, verb tenses, and it can result in misunderstanding. So what are our communication strategies? This little video is what not to do, and she does use a naughty gesture at the end, which I do not promote, but it's a pretty good example of what not to do when communicating with someone who is deaf or hard of hearing.
Hey, I was wondering something. Does this ever happen to you sometimes? You're talking with a friend, having a conversation, and then someone walks up to you. How are you doing? Hey, can you hold on a second so I can interpret for my friend, please? Oh, your friend is deaf? Oh, yeah. How are
Oh no, let's try again.
you interpret for my friend, please? Oh, your friend is deaf? Oh, yeah. How are you doing? Do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah, I'm fine. I know sign language. Okay, so it doesn't really happen like that, but I bet you want to do that when it does happen. So tell me, does that ever happen to you, or is it just me?
Okay, so you saw she really cleverly showed you what not to do and what would be considered rude. When you're using an interpreter, if an individual's primary method of communication is signing, you will probably need an interpreter. So there's some basic etiquette to using an interpreter. You want to make sure you have the attention of the person you are talking to prior to speaking, not the interpreter, although you'll need that also, but you really want to make sure that you have the attention of your communication partner. A tap on the shoulder or a wave is an appropriate way to get this attention. You want to focus your attention on the person that you're talking to and not the interpreter. Maintain eye contact with your communication partner. Speak at a normal rate and volume. Even though the person is using an interpreter, they'll still be watching your face to pick up on your facial expressions and your cues, and they may be doing some speech reading as well. Plus, when you speak at a normal rate and volume, you're making it easier for the interpreter. Understand that using an interpreter takes more time. The interpreter is going to be a few words behind you, and the message needs to be processed by the interpreter. It needs to be processed by the person using the interpreter, and then the person using the interpreter has to respond, and the interpreter has to respond back to you. So you will need to allow more time for this process to happen. When speaking, if the individual is hard of hearing and not using an interpreter, proximity is really, really important. Do not shout from across the room. Go over to the person to whom you are speaking and make sure you have his or her attention. Once again, you want to maintain eye contact. As the girl in the video who was signing said, you get a lot of information by watching your communication partner's face. Speak clearly. Do not exaggerate your speech or speak excessively slowly. This will distort the way speech sounds look on your mouth, and it could confuse your communication partner if he or she is using speech reading to improve their understanding. This is a time when you want to use open-ended questions to check for comprehension. It's too easy to fake understanding by answering a yes or no question with a nod or a head shake. So you really, if you want to check and make sure the individual is understanding what you're saying, you really want to use those open-ended questions at this point. Allow plenty of time for your communication partner to process what you've said and to respond. If something is misheard, misunderstood, or not heard, repeat what you've said. If it's still not heard, then you want to try rephrasing and using different words that will convey the same meaning. And then once again, you can use the environment for visual cues as necessary. Also, use the context of what your communication partner is saying to help figure out meaning. If you know the context of what they're talking about, then you don't necessarily have to understand every single word they're saying to get their general message. And then once again, technology can really be helpful. Email, messaging, texting can be great ways to communicate. Or you can always just get out the good old-fashioned pen and paper and you can write back and forth if you need to. And that will end our presentation on hearing loss for this week.